Chapter 10. The Five Aggregates. In brief, the five grasped-at groups are suffering, and they are as follows. The grasped-at group of the body, the grasped-at group of feeling, the grasped-at group of perception, the grasped-at group of mental formations, the grasped-at group of consciousness. For full knowledge of which, while the Exalted One was still alive, he has frequently instructed disciples in this way. This section of teaching taught by the Exalted One among disciples was thus. Many times has he emphasized, body is impermanent, feeling is impermanent, perception is impermanent, mental formations are impermanent, consciousness is impermanent, body is not self, feeling is not self, perception is not self, mental formations are not self, consciousness is not self. Compiled from the words of the Buddha. When one begins meditation, there's enthusiasm. I'm really going to do this now as well as I can. After a few days, one gets used to it. Then the mind starts thinking, isn't this ever going to end? I can assure you it will. You see, everything ends. Nothing lasts forever. When the mind talks like that, just watch. Be aware and say, are you playing games with me again? Don't believe a word the mind is saying. You don't believe everything it says outside meditation, so why should you believe what it says during meditation? It's as unruly in as out of meditation. It just plays games with us. Every time the mind makes such statements as, I've had enough, I'll never get enlightened, or I'm doing so well I can go home, you can just answer, be quiet. I'm going to meditate. It's a matter of determination, one of the 10 virtues. One can't get along without it. The mind also has other things to talk about. It wants to entertain itself with all that is lacking for its sensual enjoyment. It's used to having far more sense stimulations, more entertainments. It's used to having discussions, going from one place to another, seeing different sights, going shopping, and choosing what it prefers. It's used to meeting different people. Here we see the same old faces again. Nothing new. Nothing to discuss. It's used to getting different kinds of food every day and deciding what it wants to eat. Here it has to take what's there. All these things are irksome to the mind because it wants its own way. The ego says, I want it my way and no other way. We are so used to believing this that we don't take time to investigate this attitude. If we did, we would soon know. This is desire. Craving that creates nothing but suffering. That is all it can ever create. When the mind starts acting in this way, talk back to it. Be your own mother. Tell the mind that it's behaving like a child, that you are the mother, that you are looking out for its welfare, and that you know what's good for it. Be both mother and child. Ordinarily, we are 50 or 100 different people. Thinking good thoughts, thinking nasty thoughts, feeling good about other people, creating havoc inside. We have all sorts of personas. Here we can be mother and child. The childish one wants everything its own way, and the mother says, no, we're going to do it the best way, which may not be the easiest, but the most skillful. The reason for these difficulties has been explained by the Buddha in the 5 aggregates of clinging, which are what we consist of. They are all there is to us. Yet we make something out of them, which isn't there. Again, the mind plays games so successfully that everybody believes it. The body. The five aggregates of clinging have as their largest and most noticeable object the body. Nobody can forget that, and everybody has some sort of problem with it. Not necessarily consistently, but now and then. I can't sit. My knees are hurting. My back's hurting. My tummy is hurting. I'm feeling dizzy. I'm feeling tired. The Buddha said that the unenlightened, untrained disciple has two darts, or two arrows that are hurting him, and the enlightened, trained disciple has one. The two arrows are mind and body, and the one is the body only. The Buddha also fell ill sometimes, but he continued to teach. It didn't stop him at all. In the end, he became very ill, and when he was on the verge of dying, he went into the meditative absorptions and thus passed away. Having very bad stomach cramps was no detriment to him. The enlightened, trained disciple also has body problems and difficulties. This body just isn't perfect, and it's never totally satisfactory. When the unenlightened, untrained disciple is affected by that, a reaction arises in the mind and responds with, "I'm feeling badly. I can't do this or that because of my condition. My body hurts so that I can't sit up or lie down or stand or whatever it may be that it feels uncomfortable." The worst of it is constantly trying to adjust one's activities to the way the body dictates. Is it ever possible to adjust one's situation totally so that the body feels perfectly all right? Has anyone yet found that situation where the body always feels perfect? You can move from here to there, from one climate to another, from a chair to a couch, from a couch to the floor, and back to the chair. What happens? Nothing. There's always a problem. So we might as well just stay on this pillow. This body, which is the first one of the five attributes that we consist of, has as its characteristic a changeable nature. Nobody will deny that, but the changeable nature automatically brings unsatisfactoriness with it. If we find a comfortable position, it doesn't stay that way for more than 5 or 10 minutes. Discomfort arises again and again, even at night on the best mattress. The body still moves. Because of the body's inherent nature of change, there is constant friction. The movement of the blood, of the lungs, of the heart, and of the breath. All are necessary for staying alive, but each movement creates friction. It's impossible for them not to. With that movement comes subtle discomfort. The more awareness one has, the more one knows this discomfort. The more one can also realize that as long as there is a body, there will never be total satisfaction gained through it. Eventually, the body and its demands have to be disregarded. It always has new demands. Once it's full of food, it wants to clean out its bowels. Having done that, it wants to get new food. It's always reaching for something, never satisfied. It can't be, because it is constantly changing. It needs repetitive input and outflow, otherwise it can't even stay alive. Over and over again, the Buddha recommended mindfully putting one's attention on the body as the path to liberation. Whoever does not observe the body with mindfulness has not seen the path to the deathless, he said. This encourages equanimity about the useless demands of the body and also brings more insight to the fact that to say, "This is my body," is an illusion. If it were my body, if I really were the owner of it, why doesn't the body behave the way I'd like it to behave? Why doesn't it stay young, beautiful, and healthy for as long as we want it to? And even when it is young, beautiful, and healthy, why does it have demands that we can't satisfy? namely constant comfort. Even then, the sitting position in meditation becomes unpleasant. Why doesn't it listen? Why does it die when we want to live? Why do other people's bodies die when we want them to live? Either it's total chaos or there is some misconception in our mind about body, life, and death. There is a strong feeling in each one of us that this body is mine, yet there's very little one can do with it, except constantly comply with its demands. Put it to bed when it's tired, get it to the dinner table when it's hungry, give it something to drink when it's thirsty, make it move when it's uncomfortable. We adhere to its demands and are not really in charge of it. Mindfulness, which puts full attention on the movements and the characteristics of the body, can eventually see with clarity that the body is nothing but a conglomeration of parts that happen to be working in some manner and fashion as long as there's life. The parts hardly ever work quite perfectly, otherwise there wouldn't be any aches and pains, and they only keep going for a certain number of years. We call this body mine, creating the illusion of a me. We think, I know what I look like. When I look in the mirror, I see me, and I actually know this is me. Yet, were we to make a closer examination, we would find thousands of me's, all different sizes, shapes, and colors. Sometimes a little fatter, sometimes a little thinner, first short, then taller, having black hair, then gray hair, having no glasses, later with glasses, feeling miserable, feeling wonderful. The question must arise, which one is me? If the answer is, I'm all these different people, we have at least seen that we are not one, but maybe 100,000 people, and as we've already discussed. Which one of these 100,000 can we pick out to be the real me? There has to be somebody that's real to keep the me going. It's impossible for one person to be 100,000 people. It doesn't work, does it? We may think, I'll pick the one I am at this moment. But then what about the next moment? What about 10 years from now? Always the one in this moment, that's me. We wind up with a constantly changing me that is sometimes hardly recognizable. Yet we think this is my body and attach great importance to it. Of course, we have to look after our bodies. It would be foolish not to. But to let our bodies dictate our lives is futile, because the body will never be satisfied. Even at one's last moments, the body still craves comfort. There are several meditation techniques the Buddha mentioned in the Discourse on the Foundations of Mindfulness that help one to lose some of one's attachments and ego illusion about the body. There has to be a balance between calm and insight. Insight is essential and can result in the unconditioned. Calm is always conditioned by the ability to concentrate. If anything happens to the body and the body is no longer able to sit, the calm will be gone because insight has not arisen. Insight about this body has to be part and parcel of the spiritual path. The meditations that the Buddha advocated in the Foundations of Mindfulness discourses are called the charnel ground meditations, 9 different ways of seeing one's own dead body. We are definitely going to be dead, so we might as well accept it now and not wait until it happens. We might even now shake with fear every time the heart misses a beat, or we don't feel quite as well as we used to when we were 17. One of the ways of meditation on death is seeing oneself as a skeleton, looking at it sitting there in a meditative posture. Next, take the skeleton apart and lay the bones out one by one. Then let the bones crumble to dust. It takes away some of the ego illusion and the attachment to this body. One of our impediments is desire for physical comfort. It doesn't allow us to stay up at night because we could be too tired. It asks us to protect ourselves from mosquitoes and flies, from cold or hot weather, from any potential discomfort. We are busy protecting ourselves and spend much precious time on that. It's one thing to know that we're going to die, but it's another thing to actually see one's death with one's inner vision and accept it with equanimity. Try it in your next meditation session for a few minutes. See yourself dead and watch the reaction. The first reaction may be, I can't do it and I don't want to do it. Try again. The Foundation of Mindfulness discourse is so well known because it provides the way to the deathless state, which is liberation. Most people come to a meditation course because they want to get some peace and quiet. They want to get away from it all and find some bliss, joy, and happiness that they can't find at home. Fine. But that's only one aspect of the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha called this a pleasant abiding, and it relies on favorable conditions. Some people have already experienced the fact that their inner body is making it impossible for them to meditate. Some people have already experienced the fact that their body is making it impossible for them to meditate. Some of them are lying down, and some of them even have even gone home because the mind is reacting to discomfort. We are all prone to this danger. Let's know the danger before it happens and do something about it by seeing the body as it actually is. Doesn't work. Oh well. Feeling. The next... sorry if that just made a noise. Feeling. The next of the 5 attributes that we consist of is feeling. It plays another very important part in our ego illusion because we believe feelings to be ours. I'm feeling well or unwell, or I'm feeling happy or unhappy. Yet if they are ours, why don't we have jurisdiction over them? Why can't we constantly feel well, constantly feel happy, alert, at ease? Why not? Who is in charge of all this? The ego illusion arises because we believe body and feelings to be ours. Yet when we examine them, we must come to the conclusion that we really have no say in the matter. It's all just happening. How do we come to think it's me? When there's any feeling of discomfort, sadness, boredom, or frustration, we become uncomfortable, sad, bored, frustrated. We react by being involved with the feeling instead of knowing that this feeling has arisen and will pass away, as feelings do. The moment we take our attention off the sadness and frustration, the boredom or intolerance, they're gone. But instead, we believe our feelings stay with us and act accordingly. When the feeling of anger arises, people become angry instead of saying, "Ah, yes, it's a feeling of anger, it will pass. I'll take my attention off it." Nothing creates ego except the belief that I am the body, I am the feeling. Perceptions. Next, we consist of perceptions, which tell us what things are. When the eyes see something, all it can distinguish is shape and color. The eye can only see that this is square and white in front and black at the back. But because you've seen such a thing many times before, you know this is a clock. The mind says clock, and then the mind might continue. I wonder if it's local. She probably brought it with her from Australia. I wonder what it would cost over there. That's the mind talking. But if a 3-year-old comes in here and sees this, he may try playing ball with it. He doesn't know it's a clock. He might think it's a ball because he's familiar with balls, or he might think it's a building block and try to make a house with it. That's what he's familiar with. That's his perception of it. The eye sees only shape and color. But perception has the conditioning of memory. Somebody who hasn't got a clock might think, I want one like that too. Or somebody who has a better one might think, mine is much more valuable. Ego is arising immediately, asserting its desires or superiority feelings. In reality, all we have seen is a square little box, black in the back, white in the front. Because of ego delusion and conditioning, perception creates a thinking process that we, of course, believe. There's no reason to disbelieve it because we've never analyzed it. By believing it, we are perpetuating the ego illusion. We are constantly thinking because we have to support our ego illusion. The ego is so fragile that it will fall apart unless it's supported. We keep adhering to the demands of the body, and we become the feeling to support our ego illusion. If we were only to look at the feeling and say, it's just a feeling, then there would be no ego affirmation. Ego needs constant support because it isn't real. We don't have to keep saying, this is the house, this is a big house, this is an old house, it's obvious. This house exists, but the ego doesn't, and therefore it needs constant confirmation. This support comes from our thinking process and gets additional help from being appreciated and loved, and through these sense contacts and our perception of them. Mental formations. We further consist of mental formations. They are also called karma formations. They are the karma makers. The moment the thought process starts, we're making karma. If somebody sees this clock and says, it's a clock, I don't have one, I'd like one too, the karma has been made, the karma of greed. Or someone says, this is a nice clock, mine isn't as nice. That's the karma of envy. Immediately when the thought process starts, some karma is being made. Some of it is neutral. There's no impact from it. When one just says, that's a clock, that's neutral. But most of the time we make it either good or bad karma. If we see a color and we say, I'm going to paint my house that color, that's neutral. But behind it may already be the intention of having a nicer house than the neighbor. That's unskillful karma. When we believe all that's going on in the mind, we have our cherished ego support. That's why it's so difficult to stop thinking in meditation, because the ego support would be lost. Even if the thinking stops for a moment and there is calm and quiet, the thoughts will immediately come back and say, ooh, what was that? That was nice. That's the end of that meditation, and one has to start all over again. There is constant karma being made with our thought processes. They are judging, deciding, grasping, or rejecting. Only the mindfulness of moment-to-moment awareness can make a correct analysis. When we can see what we're doing and no longer need to believe all that the mind tells us. In meditative practice, one notices clearly that most of the mind stuff is pretty unbelievable. It's either old and gone, or it hasn't even happened yet. Or it's plain fantasy. Most of the thoughts that flit through the mind have no real connection with anything. The mind usually grasps at some trigger and uses it to play its own games. Sense consciousness. The fifth attribute that we consist of is sense consciousness. This means the contact we make with our senses. The eye, the objects, and the eye consciousness come together, and what results is sight. The ear, the sound, and ear consciousness together produce hearing. We are constantly using our senses. At this moment, you are using your eyes, your ears, your touch, and your mind consciousness. The eyes see what's going on around you. The ears hear what I'm saying. The touch notices the sitting posture. The mind tries to grasp the meaning of what is heard. We try to create situations in which the sense contact what pleases us. But the endeavor is hopeless. It is impossible to obtain only pleasant contacts. Constant attacks are being made on us through the senses. This is the way of living beings, and very noticeable in the human realm. When there's a very loud noise, people become frightened. Some noises are pleasing to us, and yet if we were to continue them without end, they would become unbearable. We can't simply continue to play Beethoven for the rest of our lives. The senses are not exactly what we think they are. In fact, most people take them for granted. They don't even think about them. All they want are the pleasurable sensations. Pleasure is certainly available through the senses, but very few people ever think that the senses are actually a misery to us. They're constantly pushing us in all directions trying to find pleasure. The Buddha gave a simile about the body, its incessant demands and resulting misery. A father and a mother are traveling through the desert with their small child. They run out of provisions, but continue their journey until they become so weak and hungry that they can't go on. In the end, they slay the child and eat it. Our mental formations are compared to a prisoner who is being dragged by two fellows into a flaming pit. Our thought processes, whether good or bad, drag us into the flames of rebirth. The Buddha tried to show, with these similes, the inherent unsatisfactoriness of all that constitutes a human being, so that we could make real effort to get out of the wheel of birth and death. We have to understand that there is no individual who owns body, feeling, perception, thought, and consciousness. That is the most difficult aspect of the Buddha's teaching, difficult to conceptualize and even more difficult to experience. Without meditation, it will remain an intellectual exercise. 5 khandhas, 5 aggregates, 5 attributes is all we are. Then the question arises, if that's all we are, what are we trying so hard for? Yes, that's all we are, but that's not what we think we are. We've got to work with what we know, and we don't know that that's all we are. We know something entirely different about ourselves. We know this is a me with body and feeling, perception and thinking and sense consciousness. So we have to work with that and purify our emotions in order to come to the point where we do know that that's all there is. When there isn't anybody there, there couldn't possibly be a problem. Problems only exist if there's somebody there to have them. There is the deed, but no doer. There is suffering, but no sufferer. There is the path, but no one to enter it. And there is liberation, but no one to attain it.